The government during the pandemic has absolutely recognized that this is a problem and is providing quite a bit of subsidy.
Never seen anything like this ever.
At Real Vision, we're always looking for new alternative investment opportunities. Investing in U.S. broadband infrastructure is one of those exceptional opportunities that's popping up right now. The broadband network has been neglected for so long, and now, after decades of underinvestment, it's at the forefront of a new multi-trillion-dollar government infrastructure program. Here's how you can gain exposure. It's estimated that as many as 162 million Americans are not using the internet at broadband speeds. Of those people, approximately 19 million Americans, 6% of the population, still lack access to fixed broadband services at threshold speeds. In rural areas, the problem is even worse, with nearly a quarter of the population lacking broadband access entirely. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's how critical it is for every American to access the internet at broadband speeds. Those without access, students and remote workers alike, have been severely handicapped. This lack of internet access is unacceptable and concerning for America's global standing. The government is aiming to bridge this digital divide and give investors a chance to participate in this exponential growth opportunity. They want to connect the unconnected and enable investors to make a great return in the process.
Broadband really comes in two flavors. Point to point, so point A to point B, and we call that point to point, or it's point to multi-point systems.
Today, there are over 40 million households that lack broadband altogether. Probably about 25% of people living in rural America today don't have any broadband whatsoever. If you're on a First Nation, you live on a tribal land, the number is even higher. It's staggering.
So in the 90s, digital divide was the catchphrase, and with the pandemic, what was advertised and what was phrased as the digital divide is now a national emergency.
We've obviously seen internet become more critical than ever with COVID. And in response to closing the digital divide, there's a huge need to bring broadband to communities that are underserved. And prior to COVID, this was recognized by the federal government, and there was a number of stimulus plans that were put in place. Connect America Fund, Connect America Fund 2, the Rural Development Opportunity Fund, and that had deployed, allocated over $20 billion of government subsidy to support the notion of closing the digital divide and bringing quality internet to the millions of households that don't have that today.
Before you had broadband, you couldn't really enable streaming and remote work like we do now. So if you think about how we get our broadband or how we get our entertainment, how we get our education now, think about not having that and what that means to your economic possibilities. You get isolated. You can't find the latest news. So you don't have the opportunity that the rest of us have.
Many Americans, 25% of rural areas, they're not connected to the internet. And when you have a pandemic with shelter-in-place orders and children don't have connectivity or internet access whatsoever, you have a national emergency where children can't learn, elders cannot get telehealth and telemedicine assistance, and people cannot connect to their businesses to make money, to be able to continue to pay their rent, to pay the food, and to be able to buy internet access.
So really, when you talk about the digital divide, not having broadband is an issue for equity in the U.S.
COVID-19 has highlighted the digital divide, but it's also providing the conditions for investors to take advantage of this new opportunity as public and private sectors unite to connect the unconnected.
People need it to communicate with their doctors. They need it to go to school. They need it to go to work. And that has really shined the light on the disparity in access to what is a necessary utility.
The government during the pandemic has absolutely recognized that this is a problem and is providing quite a bit of subsidy. So there are programs to the tune of about $43 billion that have been at play and are at play now to be able to connect all of those folks that are underserved or not served at all to the internet.
The market is typically served by many small service providers. One of the things that they lack is the ability to access the capital required to build up the networks, grow their business, and compete with some of the larger organizations in this space.
The issue is not really the funds themselves, but how does a WISP, which is a wireless internet service provider, obtain these funds? On the private side, on LTE build-out alone, there's approximately $8 billion for private LTE build-out. So those are private networks. And that does not include Wi-Fi and other projects. It's very difficult to quantify because the numbers are so huge. When you start talking about build-out and you go to, let's say, IoT, which is the Internet of Things, by 2025, that's projected to be a $1.6 trillion market, and all that needs connectivity.
Never seen anything like this ever. And the one thing that's keeping a lot of these small providers from being able to compete effectively in this market and help close that digital divide is access to capital. That's what Latitude 42 provides.
Latitude 42 is playing a crucial role in building out infrastructure and thereby helping to close the broadband gap and deliver quality internet to populations now underserved in the United States.
Latitude 42 helps companies get these unconnected connected. And we do that by financing the build-out of infrastructure. Building out infrastructure is an expensive proposition. You may have to put in a couple $100,000 to build out a tower before you get the revenue from your consumers. And the consumers are going to pay you on a monthly basis. We match your expenditures with hardware as a service with the way you're making income, so they match and it becomes economically viable.
One of the things that's unique amongst one of the recent programs from the federal government is the CRRSAA fund, which is about $21 billion. Within that $21 billion, there is $3.2 billion dedicated to a pledge to keep Americans connected. And what that means, service providers in very rural areas or impoverished areas are going to be able to deliver internet access to those households that are underserved or unserved. And they're going to be able to get reimbursed upwards of $100 per month for delivering that access. From a cash flow and a capital perspective, Latitude 42, with our hardware as a service rental option, helps those folks deploy that equipment faster without incurring all of the capital expense to buy that up front.
Latitude 42's approach and why it's important for all these activities is we really smooth out the finance curve. We give the reseller, the WISP, the ability to match their cash flow from income to their expenses.
For example, a service provider that is awarded $240 million in Connect America funding is going to receive $2 million payments from the government over the course of 10 years, and that's per month. The government's expectation is that those networks will be deployed within 6 years. And what you have in the situation of a service provider that is awarded $240 million, they have a $96 million gap from when the technology needs to be deployed to when the government will finally catch up and compensate them with these subsidy funds. So Latitude 42 solves that by providing hardware as a service rental versus a big capital upfront expenditure.
Hardware as a service can be in a data center. It can be in an elder care facility for their, let's say, Wi-Fi connectivity. It could be in a hotel and hospitality, or it could be in any enterprise type of environment.
Latitude 42 is on a path to exponential growth going forward. As an investor, you have a chance to share in that growth opportunity.
Initially, we are going to market with some convertible notes that'll be tokenized, and they will return 5% on that investment. They will be marketed, and you'll be able to trade those tokens at some point in the future. Subsequently, we may issue additional equity as we continue to grow.
The reason why we did security tokens is because anybody that's invested in a private investment in the past realizes it's very difficult to get liquidity. So the reason we're doing a security token is because we plan to have our token traded on alternative trading systems, which will provide liquidity to the people that are going to invest in Latitude 42. The minimum return will be 5% per year over the life of the token, which is projected to be 10 years. Now, of course, you can convert that, since it's a convertible note, to equity when the equity round comes out in the next 24 months. The reason I said minimum of a 5% per year is because since we're moving the token to alternative trading systems, we don't really know where that token will trade. It may trade at a premium. So in that case, you may receive more than 5%, but the company is guaranteeing a 5% return per year.
One of the really cool things about Latitude 42 from an investor's perspective really is the long tail on the return on this. When people deploy broadband equipment, particularly on a tower, that access point has a useful life of 5 to 8. We've seen them up as longer than 10 years. Through our rents, we've recovered the cost of our investment by the end of the 3rd year. The amount of the rents that falls through the income increases dramatically once that asset is paid for. Our emphasis is really on how quickly can we deploy capital, and the more that we deploy, the more profitable the investment becomes. It gets really attractive is what happens 3 and 4 and 5 years down the road as those assets have been completely realized and they just turn to profit.
Latitude 42 has created a new model and will lead to a new type of infrastructure finance fund. Changes in the U.S. tax code now allow Latitude 42 to immediately depreciate 100% of the acquired asset's value, an additional advantage over traditional lending. This will allow the company and its investors to keep earning significant returns for years after a quick payback on the investment. This means much higher returns on investment than the same capital deployed in a bank loan with similar risk profiles. Latitude 42 also benefits from having a highly experienced management team that has demonstrated the ability to grow businesses individually and collectively. This proven experience and market knowledge only make it easier for Latitude 42 to quickly partner with others in the industry and rapidly start building out the future of broadband infrastructure. In short, it's a win-win for broadband consumers and investors in the company. If you're interested in finding out more about this opportunity, you can contact Norm Dumbroff at latitude42.com.